Thank you for staying with BizCheck on KBC Channel 1. My name is Betty Kiptum. In the second hour of the program, we want to discuss matters of border conflict. And to have this conversation is Dr. Murei. She is a policy research and data analyst at the UNDP Africa Borderlands Center. Thank you for joining us, Dr.
Thank you, Betty.
Karibu sana. Now, let's just set the stage, because most of the people who live around the borders, they're facing a number of challenges. There's a report that your organization conducted. Could you just give us some of the findings from that report?
Thank you, Betty. The Africa Borderlands Center at the UNDP launched a research report titled Promise, Perils and the Resilience of Africa Borderlands Center. This report majorly looked at agro-pastoralists in 8 countries, and we were looking at how these communities for the longest time have been able to respond to multiple vulnerabilities, and to appreciate that these borderlands are marginal areas in the periphery of most countries in Africa. And just to give you an estimation, it is estimated that in African borderlands in the continent, there are about 270 people who live here. And for the longest time, they've been left behind, either in economic planning or in development or policy. So our research, we're looking at how do these communities respond to these vulnerabilities, how do they adopt? So we took a methodology whereby we did a survey, but also intimately talk to these communities, and therefore why we are calling the report Voices from the Borderlands, so that they can be able to tell us, yes, this is their home, this is how they live despite these climate-related shocks. And for instance, in the Horn of Africa, as you are aware, the whole of last year, there were all issues of impacts of droughts. Communities could not be able to get water or even have enough food. So generally, that was the focus of the research. And some of the outcome that we noted, there are 3 very, very key findings that came out. One, these communities are saying this is their home, and despite these challenges, they want to continue living here because they can diversify labor. Yeah, as much as they are herders and they are farmers, they can diversify, for instance, by getting into value chain, by trading across the borders. Therefore, they can get some income. The other issue they also told us is the issue of family. And as you are aware, the agro-pastoralists in these regions, and for instance in Kenya, the sample point was West Pokot County and Marsabit County. They told us that they have intermarried, they cross the borders, either during hard times, but also they very, very much so depend on the support, because sometimes you will find on the other side of the border, there could be income. On the other side of the border, there could be social cultural activities that bring them together. So they say that that is one thing that they would want to be supported. And thirdly, the issue of them being enabled in terms of mobility, because as you note from the 2 things that I've talked about, trade, they cross to trade, family, they have kinship across the border. So therefore, stakeholders working with them in these areas should be able to facilitate them rather than inhibit their mobility. So those are just the few findings I could touch on for now. Yes.
When you talk about 270 million, yeah?
Yes,
million people. That is, those are very many people, and the economy can really benefit from these communities. What do you think governments, especially considering these are border points, people are crossing from one country to another, what can governments do to better the lives of these people?
In reference to our report, it was actually co-created and co-implemented with regional economic blocs like the East African Community, the ECOWAS in the West, and the African Union. And as you are aware, through the African Union and the member states, they all embracing these findings. And one of the things they could do, for instance, is working together with these border communities so that they can be able to put in place joint up enabling policies to, for instance, support these communities to trade, and also value addition, since we are talking about farmers and herders, value addition into a value chain, for instance, if it is the livestock, can they look at a way so that these farmers, instead of losing their livestock during drought, can there be something like an insurance? And for those that animals are surviving and they are into hides and skin trade, can that value chain be supported so that they can be able to trade? For the farmers, can something like agro-processing value chain be looked into by this member state so that instead of wastage, these communities can be, therefore get income? And just to give an example, apart from the research, the Borderlands also have a social experiment whereby we've looked at these communities because they have things they are doing. For instance, in Sahel, this is Niger, Burkina Faso and Mali, we are supporting a value chain, milk value chain. And these Borderlands communities, their milk was going into waste, and it's something that also happening in areas that communities are rearing a lot of cattle for milk production. And we are supporting them instead of wasting this economic program. They can be supported to digitalize their selling of milk. Therefore, they can reach the market. So we are looking at this, and we can work with the member state and other stakeholders in the region to be able to share the lessons learned from our social experiments under the innovation. And also, just to give another example in terms of women and youth that are actually being involved. And one of the findings is that women and youth actually involved in informal cross-border trade. And one of the things they said, if they can be given a boost so that in trading they can reduce the distance, they can also reduce the cost of trading. So for instance, if governments can invest in warehousing in these borders, so that if these communities have harvested, if they have livestock product and other products, and there is a warehouse near the border, they can be able to trade very quickly. And also the issue of security and safety for these agro-pastoralists and also cross-border traders. I think those are some of the things that these communities told us. If governments and stakeholders look at that, they would really appreciate, because it will boost their economic income in terms of what they do.
As I was going through the report, I saw that 62% of the respondents say they feel safe where they live, but also there's the issue of the security challenges. I mean, there are scarce resources currently because of a number of issues, including climate change. One of the things I noticed was the inadequate presence of government, you know, where they are. And even where government is present, they also face harassment sometimes. Could you speak about that?
I want to make reference to that finding and to elaborate that the research that we did was very, very incorporative of the communities. So this feedback are actually direct reporting and requests from the communities saying that, for instance, in terms of service delivery, we appreciate that we get support. For instance, I think 25% they get support from government, and they appreciate that. And they are saying if that would be added a little bit more, and especially in areas where it's inaccessible, issues of infrastructure, so that when you invest on infrastructure, then it is easier for them to be able to cross the border and even trade. And also on the issue of the security, if therefore you have security, if you increase access, therefore you're reducing also the insecurity, and you are reducing issues of banditry, because in some areas it's inaccessible, and therefore you will find that they cannot even trade or do any other economic activities. So these communities are saying, yes, we appreciate what is already being done, but we are therefore saying there are some pockets where we don't have health facilities, we don't have roads, and there is insecurity. Therefore we are saying if government and these other, for instance, regional economic communities can support us in making sure that there is electricity, that we can access, there is water, then we'll be able to thrive. Yes.
These people who live along the border, of course there are other agro-pastoralists who live within these countries. They don't cross the border to look for pasture and all that. What makes their way of living very unique?
What makes their way of living very unique is one thing. Remember, in the beginning of this discussion, I talked about the issue of family and kinship. So you will find, even for those who are not crossing the borders, they are the custodian of what they already do in terms of building their resilience and adaptation. So you will find that there is a magnet that glues them together, and by crossing the border, they are either sharing culture, they are either sharing an innovative way of being able to survive and live together. And one of the things we are also looking into is, apart from just looking at the mobility across the border, what are the development long-term solutions in these areas? So that, for instance, where you are having migrants and you're also having communities who are stayed there for a long time, do you want to work together and ensure that there are durable solutions for those who are migrating, and there are also for those who are still staying there, and they call this place called Borderlands home. So we're looking and we are calling of all stakeholders of goodwill, private sector, governments, to ensure and to work with us, so that carrying from what we are doing in terms of the social experiments, what is it that we can learn together, so that we can scale that up and reduce the suffering, but also increase their resilience. And something else, Betty, to mention, in these areas, we have noticed, and from the feedback from the research, they said, if we can be supported to be empowered economically, we can therefore ensure we reduce the spaces for conflict, but increase the space for peace and social cohesion. So we are therefore saying these development solutions in these borderlands, if we mobilize resources, if we work together, we can therefore enhance the social cohesion, we can therefore enhance peace, and therefore we'll see the development dividends increase.
You mentioned that the issue of infrastructure is very big. I mean, you said you did the report in eight countries.
Yes.
The infrastructure deficiency, so to say, is it the same across the 8 countries?
No, it is not. It is not the same, because you will find that in some borderland areas, like for instance, if we pick like the Marsabit in the Kenya-Ethiopia border, or in the Nigeria, Sokoto, you will find that in some areas we were looking at a borderlands that is 30 kilometers to the border. So you will find within this distance, you will find that a lot of infrastructure is okay. But there are some areas like in West Africa, like the Sokoto I've mentioned, 80 to 100 kilometers off the international border, the infrastructure are still very low. So you will find that there are different issues regarding accessibility to infrastructure and all that. So what we are saying, if you look at the specific recommendations, we're also going to package in such a manner that for every borderland, there are issues and there are recommendations. So we will domesticate appropriately to this borderlands environment. It's not a blanket all through. There you will find in some areas there could be electricity, in some areas they don't have. In some areas you will find that the issue of water, what came very clear is that in all this region, one of the key issues that is deficient is water. And because farmers and pastoralists depend for this for their livelihood and for livestock and even personal use and drinking, is one of the things that it's a priority for all across these borders. But we are therefore saying it's not a blanket saying that the issue of infrastructure is uniform. No, we are going to do an implementation plan and working together with the stakeholders that I mentioned, including attracting private sector, so that, for instance, can we start in small water infrastructure so that it's accessible, and these communities, do they want to do irrigation and therefore enhance what they want to do. So there will be specific recommendation for each specific borderland and mobilize stakeholders to be able, at least each one of them, to see what they can contribute to. Yes.
There was the issue of diversification, yes? The labor diversification bit, especially when you're thinking you cannot, well, the seasons are different, availability of pasture or water for that matter is different in different seasons. What can these people do, even as they move across the border, you know, looking for these resources? What can they do to ensure that they are improving themselves economically, and just not them? How can they be supported to improve their economic standing, especially with these challenges that there are right now?
Yes, Betty. One of the things, if I may quote from one of the feedback we got, I think from Murei in South Sudan, they said, we know what we need to do to improve our farming. We just need a bit of capacity building and skills in terms of scaling up what we are doing. So we acknowledge that these communities living in these areas, they already have a way of even predicting and knowing the climate season for instance. So they are therefore saying, if we could be given a bit of the training, a bit of financial injection in what we are doing, so that we can be able to produce more and we can be able to access the market. So one of the things they said is that issues of skills, for instance, in terms of adding value to what they are doing, either as farmers or as herders. The other issue they asked for is support financially, so that if I'm already producing and I want to add value and access the market, I should be able to be supported in terms of that. The other issue they talked about is facilitation within this cross-border region, so that they can be able to move across easily, but also to be able to ensure that whatever they are trading then meets the need of their counterparts on the other side. So they are saying, we already have something we are doing, we just need a partnership injection so that we are able to do this. And one of the things that came from the women interviewers was the issue of security and safety in these spaces, so that they can also be able to do what they are supposed to do. For the youth also, is an issue of capacity building, and we are thinking with the space of digitization, if this member state or other communities and informal cross-border traders working in this place, if they can be supported with digitization and just to ensure that they up what they are doing. One other thing, Betty, that we found out that these communities, either as individuals or as communities, they are in trade unions, they are in cooperatives. So that is another area where also member states and other partners can look at that and see. And as I mentioned earlier, maybe if this can be organized in such a manner that whatever housing, where housing is provided, then they can pull together what they are producing and put there, and they can be near to the border where they're supposed to exchange these goods or services. Yes.
You mentioned that women and youth do a lot of informal cross-border trading.
Yeah.
And according to the report, there was a bit of harassment from officials. Is there anything that is being done to ensure that even as they conduct their cross-border trade, they have maybe the permits that are required and are in the right books, so to say?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we appreciate that some of the feedback we've got, they appreciate that there are already dialogues with government entities in the borders. And even with civil society organization and faith-based organization, they are working together to ensure that this informal cross-border trade understand the rules and regulations of trading. So they acknowledge that there are some areas that is already happening. And what they are saying, that I think that needs to be scaled up in terms of awareness creation, so that in case they want to trade, it is important they are trading within what is allowed. So it is important that this is scaled up in terms of awareness creation and in terms of the trading rules and regulations within the legal framework, so that also they don't break the rules as expected. So some acknowledge that there's already a lot of dialogues, a lot of trainings, but more needs to be done, so that these communities in these far-flung areas are reached and they understand. And also I think one of the things that could happen is to simplify these trade regime requirements for them to understand. And one of the things that also the women and youth said is that these requirements could be simplified and even translated in their local language, so that they can be able to understand and adhere to. Yes.
Of course, there is a pointer that maybe even the trade blocs can take up.
Yes.
What is their role in this?
As I mentioned earlier, this research report, and also to appreciate that the wider UNDP works with the regional economic blocs, including the East African Community, ECOWAS, and SADC, and others, is the critical thing is that we look at issues that would spur development. So I think it will be a good thing to start off, because in one of the recommendations is looking at what are the enabling policies, laws and regulations, and also looking at what are the gaps. And with these regional economic blocs together with African Union, then therefore can intervene in some of the gaps depending on the specific border and region, and that can be scaled up. Yes.
I'm curious, how is the education access in these borderland areas?
If you notice, in some areas, I think generally, I think it's around 44% or 45% access. So you'll see it is below average. But the good thing is that the communities and the government, either national or local, are already aware. and they are working towards this, because one of the things is that all these countries we are working to, and government, they've committed to acceleration or achievement of the SDGs and the Agenda 2063. So you will find that a lot of these countries are already prioritizing access to education as one of the key things that they want to commit to. And it's an opportunity, and especially for either counties in the ASAL, to be given a priority, so that this acceleration to SDGs and Agenda 2063 is worked towards supporting communities in the borderlands, because they've been left behind for quite some time. And with this recommendation from the report, and acknowledging that it was well designed and implemented together with governments, it will be a very good opportunity. And just to appreciate the Ministry of ASAL and East African Community from Kenya, because they worked with us together, and we also launched the report, and they're actually the champions of going to work together with United Nations and other development agencies to be able to see what they can work to implement the recommendations.
Right.
Yeah.
I asked about the education bit because of the role of innovation and technology.
Yes.
You said that they feel they need to be they need to be skilled, you know,
yes.
They need to be skilled to
yes.
ensure that they're even uplifting their own economic status. The role of innovation and technology now in even value addition, in market access for these farmers who are maybe in crop production or even in livestock production.
Yes, it's that is a very important thing you raise, and we actually acknowledge. And if you look at the recommendation, is one of the spaces we are saying it's already there, because we are in the digital age. And at the African Borderlands Center, we are also piloting to see how financial inclusion can be one of the things we look into in terms of supporting this agro-pastoralism. And I think one of the critical things that governments and member states could do is to look at the curriculum through TVET and others, even higher education, to be able to see that it responds, and actually to be able to support this youth in these areas and other traders in the region. Yes.
I am speaking with Dr. Lily Murei. She is a policy research and data analyst at the UNDP Africa Borderlands Center, and we are talking about the challenges that communities living in the borderlands are facing, and just how they can be helped to alleviate these challenges. BizCheck takes a quick break. When we come back, this conversation continues. Stay with us. Thank you for watching KBC Channel 1. This is BizCheck, and my name is Betty Kiptum. In studio, we are having a conversation about border conflict, and we are having this conversation with Dr. Lily Murei, a policy research and data analyst at the UNDP Africa Borderlands Center. Thank you for staying with us, Dr.
Thank you.
According to the report released, most of the people who are living along the border are struggling to purchase goods, basic goods. That tells a lot about their economic status. Could you speak about that?
Yeah. From the conversations with these communities in the 8 Africa borderlands where the research was conducted, one of the things we were looking at is economic livelihood, and how do they earn. Are they able to manage their livelihood from what they earn? And as you ably say, one of the things they told us is that for the last 2 years, there've been extensive growth, especially in the Horn of Africa. And the focus of this research was farmers and herders. And as we are all aware, this therefore, if there is prolonged drought, there is no rain, then there is no good harvest, and a lot of the livestock, as we have seen, are lost due to this prolonged drought. And this was their major income line. So if the crops have died due to the drought, if also livestock have been wiped away, then it's very minimal income. And this comes therefore what I talked about in terms of labor diversification. So you will find others would therefore want to find something little to trade across the border. But that little thing, if it was from crops or even their animals, they don't have. So that was the major thing that they said, that they don't have enough. Then the caution comes in, as I said, they depend on family or government or faith-based and other entities in the region. So you will find, because of this loss of livelihood, they become more vulnerable to climate shocks and risks. And that's why we are saying, to support them in this, to rebuild back their resilience, we want to look at what are that development solution that is climate resilient, that UNDP and other UN agencies and governments can start off. And we are thinking maybe focus on climate resilience infrastructure. And one of the things we are promoting as UNDP Africa Borderlands Center is what we call area-based portfolio approach. And responding to that recommendation from the research, we are thinking to pilot on the Kenya-Uganda border if we get resources. So that we are saying, is there a way we can look at, one, increasing productivity and production in this farming and livestock value chain? Can we look at partners who can support climate resilient infrastructure, even small water infrastructure? Maybe these communities can be supported to do irrigation. Can we have other partners who are coming to work with us to inject some finance? Are there partners who are working maybe on peace, security and social cohesion, so that using this packed area-based portfolio approach with these four-pronged proposals, then we can see how this can happen. And from that, we again apply our principle of a social experiment supporting development solution with communities and other stakeholders if we can scale up. So we are thinking that looking at this recommendation and working with the goodwill with partners in the region, and we want to appreciate the African Union and the member states, and also the East African Community and ECOWAS in West Africa, because they have said that we want to work together with UNDP and UN agencies and see these long-term development solutions where we can reduce the suffering of these communities, but also appreciating that these communities have got their own indigenous ingenuity and knowledge, which can be tapped into to ensure that their resilience are built.
Very important pointers there. When you talk about climate change resilience, there is also the issue that you brought up about insurance, agriculture insurance. Of course, most insurers, I was having a conversation with one of them on air yesterday. They said that most insurers shy away from agriculture insurance because it's high risk. And considering now with the effects of climate change just accelerating the impact, it becomes even more difficult. What do you think can be done to hasten access to such products or such solutions to the border communities?
I think, Betty, one of the things is through our social experiments, we've got some lessons learned and some learning lines that these communities are actually not that high risk.
Okay.
And what we are doing is that we are also looking into some activities that will give confidence to stakeholders, especially private sector. So what we are currently doing also, apart from the research, we are also looking at how can we work with governments across borders. There is a program by the United Nations called Sustainable Development Investor Map. So what we do is we work with countries and government to look at what are the investment opportunities, what are the trading opportunities that are available. And through this process, we are actually currently looking at doing an assessment to get the options, the viable options in these areas, and therefore we can share that and inspire confidence. And to appreciate that these communities, as much as they have these multiple vulnerabilities, they have shared with us and said they have, they can also contribute of what they've been doing so that they can be able to respond to these climate-related shocks. And one of the things we appreciate is that in terms of the example I gave, insurance being an option. One of the things also, we can actually move from one item of insuring maybe farming, but also look at maybe a package of resilience, resilience insurance, so that we are looking at not only one product, but we can pick a value chain, either a crop value chain, a grain value chain, or an animal value chain in a certain region. And with these communities and the knowledge they have, and the knowledge that government and stakeholders and private sector have, they can work together to actually develop a resilient insurance. So that in this case, we are then looking at long term. And just to go back to our area-based portfolio, we also want to do community assessment and what we call intervention analysis, so that what we are working to enable in terms of development solution is something that is relevant, something that is viable, and something that actually is commercially promising for any private sector. So those are the few things that we want to look into. We want to encourage that these areas, their economic value is very high. And we could work around looking at climate resilience intervention rather than looking at just one-off activity. Yes.
Of course, these particular borderlands communities, they have been, as you say, they've been left behind for a very long time, be it in terms of infrastructure or really any other bit of life. So these efforts definitely are going to help them, you know, catch up, so to say. Do you foresee that happening in the near future?
Yes, and that's why we are talking about promise in this report. Because these communities have told us that there is so much potential economically and even culturally, and using the indigenous knowledge they have, there's so much potential and there is hope. And for us as UNDP Africa Borderlands Center, that's why we are generating this knowledge and using our innovation social experiments in various other regions to be able to share these lessons learned and to be able to work together to develop a development solution that is relevant and useful. So there is hope, and we are looking at an intervention whereby we are saying, can we start with the farthest first?
Okay. And
these communities, farthest meaning they've been left behind, yes, but now we have knowledge, we have information, and actually, Betty, just to mention that we also have data, we've collected data, and just to map, when we talk about borderlands, how many borders, for instance, and what is happening there, what are the socio-economic activities. So they're saying this information is available. And these communities are saying that if we can be supported to expand our economic base, to be more resilient, to be more adaptive to this, because of course, climate change is here, but we are working together with even other agencies that are looking at climate resilience to be able to ensure that can we give priority when we are looking at financing at this region, so that, as I said, we reach this farthest first.
Farthest first.
Yes.
You've just mentioned financing, and I've remembered that financing right now, the needs in the world generally are very many. So they are fighting for the available resources in terms of financing. How easy is it to access financing for these particular causes?
I think for us at the Africa Borderlands Center, UNDP, and the UN agencies, just to mention how we work.
Okay.
One of the issues that we do, and for instance, give you an example, since the Africa Borderlands Center is based here in Nairobi and we are hosted by the UNDP country office, is that we work alongside the priorities with government.
Okay.
Government invites the UN. And that's why even for this research, as we designed, it was co-created. Even moving forward in terms of implementation, it will be co-creation. And us sharing the innovation ways that intervention can be done in the borderlands. And therefore, this provides opportunities for government and other UN agencies to find out and see that this recommendation came, yes, and which is that we can do. And one of the things that I mentioned earlier on in our discussion is the issue of financial inclusion. And we are therefore saying we have data. And the data shows that To reduce the suffering in these borderlands, these communities already have what they are doing. Can we then prioritize in terms of planning, in terms of budget allocation, in terms of financing? Because we already have this evidence. We are therefore saying we are creating the space to be able to use the evidence that have been generated from research and data to inform policy, to inform development interventions and programming. So there is space. We already have the data, and whoever is actually doing their planning for 2023, 2024, or whatever is their planning period, the data and information is there. And we are urging them to work with us so that we can be able to provide this information and data, and they can prioritize and to start with the farthest first.
The farthest first.
The Borderlands communities.
Yes, that is the message here. Start with the farthest first. When you're now talking about these border communities, they have quite a number of needs, and as you've said, their needs are a bit different from the rest of the population. So solutions have to be tailored to them, right? What does it take to do that?
What does it take? I think, allow me to mention the issue of collaborative partnership approach in long-term development solution. And one of the things we are saying, you have to start with these people where they are, what they know, and what they are doing. So we are not prescribing. We are looking at what are they doing, what options are available, and what is it that is their priority. In this research, one of the things that came up is water. The other thing that they talked about is being supported to enhance their economic livelihood, either as a farmer or as a herder. And I mentioned that the issue is, let's look at what they are doing and work together with them to do value addition. The other is access to markets and also supporting financial inclusion. So we are therefore saying tailor-making development solution, not in a prescribed manner, but working together with these communities, with governments, with the regional economic communities on what is already there so that it is enhanced. Because we are not starting from zero. Something is already happening. It's just do a collaborative partnership. And as I said earlier, all people of goodwill to look at this and pick from the recommendation and work with the UNDP and other UN agencies to see what is it that we can work together to scale up what is already working in these areas.
To scale up what is already working.
Yes.
Well, Dr. Murei, as we come to a close of the conversation, what would be your closing remarks? What is your hope for the Borderlands communities?
I think my hope for the Borderlands communities and to appreciate all the colleagues at the UNDP Africa Borderlands Center, and to appreciate the leadership of our leader, Dr. Zainu Umar, and others, and also the generally all stakeholders, both UNDP in the regional offices and in the headquarters and the UN agencies. There is hope, because already using the cooperation framework that brings together the UN agencies in these regions, we can be able to work together to solve this. So my hope is that I will commit together with other partners that we go there and work together to not only elevate the voices, but actually intervene and ensure that we have changed lives and we've been able to help them accelerating achievement of SDGs and improving on their livelihoods.
Improving on their livelihoods. Very important work that you're doing.
Thank you very much.
I pray that it bears fruit.
Yeah, thank you.
Asante sana. That is Dr. Lily Murei, a policy research and data specialist at the UNDP Africa Borderlands Center. And we have talked a lot about borderland communities, the challenges that they are facing. Of course, there is increased violence and conflict caused by intensified climate change that has made resources quite scarce. There are also socioeconomic conditions that have become very adverse and have diminished their well-being and economic standing. And of course, some solutions that are being fronted, they have to be collaborative, tailored to these particular communities, to just ensure that the people who are living along the borders of different countries are at a good place and are living good lives as well. Well, this is BizCheck. You have been watching for the past close to 2 hours. My name is Betty Kiptum. That is where we end the program this particular morning. Do enjoy the rest of your viewing. Of course, at the top of the hour, Kurunzi Mashinani will be coming up in the Swahili language. Have yourself a great day.